seen, and none of which track the entire scene themselves. So if we take a little look here, layer 1 does around about the first half, layer 2 does the next quarter, and layer 3 does the final section. And within themselves, each of these layers is pretty consistent. If we take a look at the surface here, it's moving pretty consistently. Very nice. Now, to bring all these three together in one long track, I simply have to select all three layers here, come down in the layers controls, and just click on this merge track icon. This will now generate up a new single layer that merges all three areas of the tracking together. So now if I move my surface over and out of the screen, you can still see that it carries on the tracking even when the shape finishes. So all of that tracking data, because it was coplanar, all fits together in one lovely new layer. So let's save this out. I'll actually just call this one Now, sometimes when we're tracking with Mocha, things can go completely off the rails. If we look at this clip here, we can see that as the camera pans over to the left, the door goes out of view, and eventually That result just twists and turns into something where not even Mocha can compute the layer homography. So when we want to delete all the keyframes from here, we used to have to go into the dope sheet. And this is where all the keyframes would be stored. Now with Mocha Pro 2023 and above, you don't have to do that anymore. If you're working in classic mode, you'll see over on the bottom right hand side, you'll have 3 buttons that are there to delete multiple keyframes. Delete all keyframes, or delete forwards, or backwards. But if we just click on delete backwards, nothing has actually happened here. And that's because we need to do one more thing to expose those tracking keyframes. If I go down into my track module, I can just select manual track. All of my tracking keyframes are now active and visible. I can just delete backwards from here and you'll see my layer is now not tracked anymore. I'll just go back to set to large motion so we don't see any of that other information. And as we play this back now, you'll see when we get to the beginning of the track, we don't have that bad tracking data throwing us off anymore. And one last little bonus thing, if we want to now trim this door track layer so that it's only the length of the tracking data, I'll just click this little button in the layer properties with a T in the middle, and that will set my in and out points only to the tracked region. So there are tons of these sort of workflow improvements in Mocha Pro 2023. To stay up to date with all the latest in Boris FX training, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. My name is Ben Brownlee for Boris FX. I'll see you again. Bonus thing, if we want active and visible, I can do one more thing to export backwards. But if we just click on delete backwards, nothing has actually happened here. And that's because we need to do one more thing to expose those tracking keyframes. If I go down into my track module, I can just select manual track. All of my tracking keyframes are now active and visible. I can just delete backwards from here and you'll see my layer is now not tracked anymore. I'll just go back to set to large motion so we don't see any of that other information. And as we play this back now, you'll see when we get to the beginning of the track, we don't have that bad play now not tracked. Just delete all of my go more things. Nothing has actually backwards. Keyframes on the right hand side. If you're working in classic mode, you'll see over on the bottom right hand side, you'll have 3 buttons that are there to delete multiple keyframes. Delete all keyframes, or delete forwards, or backwards. But if we just click on delete backwards, nothing has actually happened here. And that's because we need to do one more thing to expose those tracking keyframes. If I go down into my track module, I can just select manual track. All of my tracking keyframes are now active and visible. I can just delete backwards from here and you'll see my layer is now not tracked anymore of that track. We don't have, and one last layer little button only to the 2020. So there are tons of these sort of work in and out points only to the tracked region. So there are just, my name is Ben Brownlee for Boris FX. Mocha AE has been included with Adobe After Effects for a very long time. It's a flexible alternative to native point tracking and also offers more advanced masking tools. I'm going to be showing you Mocha in under a minute, and then we're going to be taking a step back and going through things in a more relaxed pace. Apply Mocha AE to the clip and click on Mocha to go into the Mocha interface. Take a shape tool, draw around the area you want to track, choose your tracking options and track the clip through. Turn on the surface and position the points, exit and save. Back in After Effects, create track data from the layer made in Mocha. Choose what you want to do with it by selecting an export data type, what layer to put it on, hit apply, and boom, job done. Was that a minute? If that was a little fast, let's step through that a little bit slower. Here's our new clip. Add Boris Effects Mocha AE as you would any other plugin. Then hit the very discreet Mocha button to launch the Mocha interface. If your viewer is set to anything except full quality, you'll get this message window pop up. You can either track it at proxy resolution, which can work rather well, or I can hit cancel and change my viewer to full quality. Hit the Mocha button again. This may be the first time you've started Mocha, so you'll see the register window. And then the big welcome screen with links to some more training resources. But let's hit start. If your screen doesn't look like mine, then make sure you have the workspace set to Essentials. When you're more comfortable, you can set these windows up how you want, but for now, we just need Essentials. The interface is broken into three main sections. At the top, we have our main toolbar. On the left, we have our layers, layer options and tracking controls, but most of the screen is filled by the viewer. At the bottom, we have the transport controls to play the footage forwards and backwards, or even just one frame at a time if you wish. We want to track this phone screen and insert something more interesting in there, but we don't have any explicit markers on the screen. Is that going to be a problem? Well, for normal point trackers, this probably would be. Point trackers need a clear and preferably unchanging area to track, something with sharp edges or high contrast. We don't have that, even with these nice corners. Likewise, we couldn't track this with After Effects Camera Tracker because the camera isn't moving. That would be better for shots with smooth camera movement and static objects. Trying the camera tracker on this shot gives us nothing. For this type of shot, Mocha is the perfect choice. At the top left, you'll see the basic toolbar. We're interested in these 3 buttons now. These are the ones that let us tell Mocha what we're interested in tracking. Let's choose the rectangular X-spline layer tool and draw our first shape. I want to track this screen, so doesn't it make sense to draw a shape around this whole area? Once I've finished drawing, the toolbar will go back to my arrow tool, or to say its proper name, the pick tool. I can reposition the control points and fit them round the screen area. When we're setting up the tracking shape, we need to think like Mocha does. Mocha is a planar tracker looking for coplanar movement within the shapes we create. If I include an area that doesn't move in the same way as the object I want to track, for example, this plant, then I'm going to get bad tracking data. I want to avoid that. But that doesn't mean we should always avoid the background. In the same way that too much salt ruins a dish, but a touch of salt is delicious, including a touch of the background is fine and may help the track. It helps to define the edges of our plane. So now we're ready to track. Or are we? Let's take a look at this clip again. Take a look here. It's important to think about what we're telling Mocha to track, as opposed to what we want to track. We have reflections crossing the screen, and they're moving in the opposite direction to the screen. This is something to look out for in your own clips. It's very common. Shadows and reflections are the leading cause of bad tracks when you're first starting out. We can filter these out in our brains, but we need to tell Mocha not to track them. Luckily, it's a straightforward fix. Let's take a look at our shape coloured in. I'll go to the top menu, View, Mattes, and Mattes. This gives me a nice overlay of my shape layer. You'll probably not need this for basic tracks, as the spline gives enough information at this stage, but you'll see why I added it in about 45 seconds. Let's look up at the toolbar again. Whenever you see a button with a little arrow in the bottom corner, you can click and hold on it, and more options will appear. Let's click and hold on the X-spline tool. And this shows different tools to draw shapes with. The difference between the tools with and without a plus is simple. If you want to add a shape to a layer, use the tool with a plus. The other tool, the one without, will create a new layer, which you can track independently. I'm going to choose the X-spline with a little plus sign on it because I want to add to this layer. Now, I say I want to add to this layer, but I actually want to subtract the reflections from the screen. Don't worry, it's the same tool. As I click to create the shape around the reflections, you can see where the 2 splines intersect. The new shape stops the reflections from being tracked. I'll close this X-spline shape with a right click, and I can adjust the tension on these points by clicking on this handle. If I want to adjust the tension across all points in the spline, I can right click on the handle, and this changes all points. There is one more issue though. This finger is going over the screen. This actually causes 2 problems, but we can fix both at the same time. Firstly, it's going to affect the track, just like the reflections. It's not coplanar movement with the screen. And secondly, if we slap our insert over the top of the finger, it's not going to be a realistic composite. So let's create a shape to mask it out. I don't want these affecting the work we've already done, so up in the toolbar, let's select the X-spline layer tool and draw around our finger. Right click and adjust the handle to smooth out all those points again. Note, because I'm not using this as a refined mask, I don't need to go too close to the edge. Look at the layers panel again, and you'll see we have 2 layers now. When tracking, any layers that are above will cut out the layer below. We call this a track matte. I'll double click on my finger layer to rename it Finger Track Matte. And while I'm here, I'll rename my other layer to screen track. Good descriptive names make working with them later in the process much simpler than having an ocean of layers called something like layer 5 copy. Alright, let's focus back on the finger layer. If we're just using a shape as a track mat to cut out the layers below, then we don't even need to track it. It being there is enough, but we can track multiple layers simultaneously. So let's see how that works. Now we're ready to track. Take a look at the track motion options. This is where we choose the type of movement that Mocha is tracking. We can do a straight translation, which is position movement, or add in scale, rotation, skew, and perspective. It's also hierarchical, so if we track rotation, then we get scale for free. My screen is rotating in 3D here. Perspective is going to be the best choice. We have a video that breaks down this choice in more detail if you'd like to know more, as part of the Mocha Essentials course. My finger mask doesn't need perspective. I can just track up to rotation. I can now track this shot. I have track forwards and backwards arrows, and we don't need to start tracking at one end of the shot. We can start in the middle. You can tell these are tracking buttons because, like me, they have a little T in their tummies. You can see the timeline turning from red to blue. Blue means frames have tracking data. Red means they don't. Sometimes the tracking is going to fail. You may get a window pop up if it can't track the object. This usually happens if the object moves off screen, or if extreme brightness or motion blur changes the shape too much. Or it can hang on to something it shouldn't, like when half the finger bends in this case. There are several things we can do here, more than we should actually cover in a quick start video, and that's why we have a full Mocha Essentials course too. For this shot though, because I'm using this just as a track mat, I'm going to track this forwards as much as I can and then just manually animate the rest. As long as our finger track mat covers the finger, it's going to do the job that we need to stop it affecting the important bit, which is the screen track. When it's finished tracking forwards, I'll move the playhead back to the start frame and track backwards. Some shapes come in and out of the screen, and you don't always have to track the full clip. Next to the Essentials tab is the Layer Properties. Here we can control the start and end frames for a particular layer. We'll be back here later too for something else. But for now, I'm going to select my finger mask, go to the first frame where it starts to impact the track, set my in point, and go to the final frame where it's off again and set my out point. The screen tracking all went through smoothly, but how do we check that? And this next thing I'm going to say is one of the most important things to learn about Mocha. There is a separation between the tracking data and the shape data. At the tracking stage, the shape acts like a sniffer dog for the area Mocha needs to look for in the next frame. After tracking, we may want to animate the shape to better fit our footage, neither of which have any influence on the tracking data itself. So while the shape data can look great, the underlying track data might not be perfect. And we have three visual aids for what the track is doing. First, the surface, the daddy of our tracking data. Up in the toolbar, I'll click this blue surface button to toggle it on. The surface lets us control where the tracking points are when we take the data out to After Effects. It makes most sense to position these at the corners of the screen, as that's what we're going to replace. If we play back, you can see it follows along perfectly. That's because the surface isn't the track data. It's our connection to how we use the track data. The surface has no keyframes. All of its animation is driven by the track data on this layer. I can move it over, and it will still move in the same way. Let's undo that with a Control or Command Z, or Z if you prefer. The trick to using the surface to check the track is to make sure our animation is smooth and doesn't diverge from the image we're tracking. With small or busy areas, this can be a little bit tough to see. In our toolbar, we have this magenta button that turns on the grid. The grid is tied to the surface and just extends out a little further past the edges. This bigger size and the grid pattern makes it easier to see jumps or drifts. If your track isn't good, the best thing you can do is figure out why it's not working and retrack. Usually it's something like the tracking shape was the wrong size, or it's being interfered with by things passing through it in a non-coplanar way. And we have other videos that deal with this in much more detail. So again, check out the Mocha Essentials course for more on that. The worst thing we can do is also the most tempting thing when you're new to Mocha, and that's to keep adjusting the shape a little and retrack a few frames, then move the shape, retrack a few frames, and so on and so forth. Doing this, you'll very likely end up with a shape that looks lovely, but completely unusable tracking data. Why? Well, remember that separation between the track data and the shape data. The track data is bad, but you've corrected the shape data so it appears like it should be good. So don't do that. Let's turn off the grid and the surface to see the final in our triumvirate of visual aids. That's the ability to insert an image into our surface. Head back to the Layer Properties tab, and with our layer selected, I can click on Insert Clip, and from the drop-down menu, choose from the standard grid or logo inserts. Let's choose a grid and play back. This is looking nice, and it fits perfectly. Remember back, we used our finger track mat to help track the screen correctly, but we also want to have a nice refined mask when we do our composite. I'm going to create a new shape for the finger that's much more accurate than the loose finger track mat shape. I'll use the X-Spline layer tool again. Just as we did before, I'll venture up to the layer panels, double click on my new layer and rename this to Finger Mask. There's a lot we can do in this layers panel. If we turn off the cog on a layer, it means we won't be processing it. I'll turn off cogs on my screen track and the finger track mat. We don't want to retrack those anymore. I can also click on the eyeball to toggle visibility on a layer. Goodbye finger track mat, we don't want to see you anymore. And I'll use the padlock to lock my screen track layer so I don't accidentally do anything to it. I could track my new finger layer in the same way I did the screen or finger track mat, but we already have a pretty decent track for the finger. So here's another way to handle this. If we head over to the left side of the screen again, underneath the track motion options and the tracking buttons, we have this Link to Track drop down. By default, this is set to its own layer and uses the tracking data we create to drive the shape. I'm going to change this to Link the Finger Track Mat. Look at what happens to the color underneath the viewer. It turns blue to show that this layer now has tracking data across the frames we tracked previously. Creating one main track and linking multiple layers to it is a technique you'll often use in Mocha, especially for bigger projects. As we play this back again, you'll see that the tracking is doing most of the hard work for us. But there are times where the tracking wasn't perfect, or it's just completely missing for some frames. Mocha is set up to auto keyframe by default. So let's move these shapes into position again. We don't want to add more keyframes than necessary. The fewer needed to do the job, the better. So we watch for the frame where it has drifted the most. Fix that, and do that again until we're finished. As I scrub through the timeline, you'll see it now animate smoothly with the tracking data too. This is a fantastic way to cut your rotoscoping or mask creation time down dramatically. you'll see a white bounding box around our shape, and we can use this to transform or adjust the shape itself. I'm not going to dive deep into this right now, but just so you know, as you explore Mocha more, there are more tools available to you to help you edit shapes even faster. If we need to add in another couple of keyframes along the way, that's fine, because most of the job is being done by the tracking. Now we have everything we need to finish this effect. We have solid tracking data, we have our surface set up in the right place, and lastly, we have a mask shape to use to hold the fingers in. Go up to the toolbar, hit save, then go File, Exit. And now we're back in After Effects. I have the image I want to use as an insert here, and I'll drag it into the timeline. Here's another thing, very important to remember. If we're using Mocha corner pin data, we need to make sure the image we're applying it to is the same resolution as the main clip. This one isn't. It's vertical and in a 9:21 aspect ratio. We need to pack this into a pre-comp to get this working correctly. Easy. Select the insert layer, go to the menu bar, choose Layer, Pre-compose. We want to move all attributes into the new composition and open up that composition. Hit OK. This composition is the same size as our main comp. Let's stretch the image to match. Right-click on the clip, Transform, Fit to Comp. This stretches it out and makes it look weird. Perfect. So now we come back into our main comp and we're ready to apply the tracking data. Select the layer we tracked and look at the Mocha AE filter parameters. Open up tracking data and hit Create Track Data. Choose the layer our tracking data is on. The cog will show us which layer is selected. It's a good thing I named these so nicely, right? Let's select Screen Track and hit OK. Let's head down to the Export option drop-down, where we choose what type of data we want to use. I like having motion blur, so let's choose Corner Pin, Support Motion Blur. Where do we want to apply this to? Let's set this up in the Layer Export To drop-down and choose the Insert Pre-comp. Finally, we hit Apply Export, and boom, our tracking data has been applied to the correct area. And because our insert layer is now the same resolution as our track data, when I RAM preview this back, it all lines up nicely. All that's left to do is cut out our fingers again. There are a few ways to do this, but let's just duplicate the main layer and place that over the top of the comp. Back in the Mocha AE parameters, I'll open up Matte. If I hit Apply Matte, it will bring back the areas where we have Mocha shapes. It doesn't quite look right yet, and that's because we have both finger and screen layers still visible in Mocha. We could go in and turn off the screen track shape in Mocha AE, or better yet, let's hit the Visible Layers button here and turn off the layer we don't need, without leaving the After Effects interface. There we go, this looks better. And because we're working with After Effects, I can turn my Mocha shapes into native After Effects shapes. Let's turn off Apply Matte again, and now click Create AE Masks. Oh, we're masked again. And if I hit M to show me the masks on that layer, there is my mask directly as it was in Mocha. And because it's a native mask, I can add feathering or expand it as I could do any other AE mask. And best yet, if I turn on motion blur on my top layer and insert layer, I'll now get native motion blur on my mask and on the screen insert. I can change the blend mode of my insert layer and color correct it to maintain some of the reflections, but our Mocha work is finished. And this is what we have. Tracking in Mocha AE is as straightforward as your footage is, and the planar tracker means that you can get better tracks with less effort than traditional point trackers. And the process is always the same. In Mocha, choose what you're tracking, choose how you're tracking it, track it, and test it. Then, back in After Effects, create track data from the layer made in Mocha, choose what you want to do with it, what layer you want to do it to, and do it. As we've seen though, there are some subtleties to get the most out of your data. Now you've watched this through, download the footage and project from the link below and watch it again, trying it out for yourself. I guarantee you, the jokes are even better the second time around. If you want to become a Mocha master, then take a look at the Mocha tutorials we have available in the training area of borisfx.com, including the must-see Mocha Essentials course. Mocha Essentials breaks down everything you've seen and why things work, and what to do when they don't. Thanks for being here. My name is Ben Brownlee for Boris Effects, and I'll see you again in another Mocha tutorial very soon. Bye for now. If you'd like to learn more about Mocha, subscribe to the Boris Effects YouTube channel. If you think we've missed anything out, then please let us know in the comments below. And once again, I recommend heading over to the Boris Effects website to check out the Mocha Essentials course, so you get the most out of Mocha AE. You're watching the free version of Mocha Essentials. Follow along with projects and footage with a premium download available at borisfx.com. And welcome back. We are going to be looking now at this shot, and we're going to be trying to track in something into the background over here. Now, this shouldn't be any particular trouble with being able to do this, except for one thing. And if I pause this here, we can see that that one thing is just moving in front of the camera and in front of the thing that we're trying to track in, and completely obscures what we're trying to do. Okay, so how do we handle this? Well, it's actually very, very simple. We're going to use something called a track matte to cut out an area that we don't want to track. Okay, so how does this work? Well, let's set up our initial track, shall we? We'll start at the best frame that shows all the area we want to track in. And in this case, I think we'll start at the end again. That's probably a nice place. And even though I want to track in just this area here, let's take a quick look at the camera movement. Now, this looks like a nodal pan, like just a regular panorama shot on a tripod. If it wasn't shot on a tripod, it was shot by someone who was just sort of bending their body around. So that works in the same sort of way. Now, cast your mind back to the dim and distant past. We looked at a shot when we were talking about the fundamentals of planar tracking and what consisted of a plane. And I said that pans were a special case, because when we're looking at a nodal pan movement, like here, the relationship between these objects don't change in the same way as if we were using a sort of free moving camera. So all of these areas could still be considered coplanar. And this is great for us. The only fly in the ointment could be these reflections here, because the way these reflections move could actually sort of start to throw things off, because they've got reflected light that is a different distance away from the camera, so could have a different movement. I think here it's not too bad, but just to be on the safe side, we're going to try to avoid those reflections as much as possible. But just be aware, reflections are always something to be on the lookout for. So I'm going to create my first shape, and I will create the first shape around the area that I actually want to track, taking in much more than I really need. Because remember, a lot of this is going to be obscured at some point. So the bit that I need is going to be set up with the surface. So let's set the surface up here. Let's bring that in there. I'm following the line of bricks, bring that in there. And again, following the bricks just gets us into the right sort of place. So that's where we're trying to put something in. Now, let's make sure that when we get to this bit where things are completely obscured, that we don't have any troubles. Let's add in some more information over here. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to add the little X-spline rectangle plus, make sure it's got the plus on there. And I'm going to add in some more here. Let's just keep it sensible. So we're bringing that texture right about there. And I think this should be enough. If you really wanted to, we could come in and come in to add a bit more of a plus with the X-spline tool, and maybe add in some extra shapes around here, something like that. But I don't think we need that. I think that would be overthinking it. So I'm just going to undo with Control or Command Z and just get rid of all of that. Boom, 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 boom. Lovely. And let's see how we get on, shall we? So I'm going to rename this. So we're now in a place where we should be getting into the habit of naming our layers. And I'm just going to call this one back wall track. And when we start to work with lots of layers, this is going to be even more important. Let's just open this up just a little bit. Let's think about the type of motion we've got here. Well, this is a nice rigid object. And because the camera movement is just a regular pan, we can use perspective here to get the best result. And let's just track that backwards, see what we get. Okay. And that went about as well as could be expected. So let's have a little look. Let's, when we had the person here moving in front of the object on the right, we got a little bit of a blip. Still able to, almost get back into place again before obviously the object, the person moved completely in front of where we were tracking and just got dragged away. Okay. And then when that was out, to its credit, we stayed pretty stable after that, but it didn't do the job. What can we do here? Well, the secret is to use another layer to block out the areas we don't want to be tracked. And this